Hello crafty friends, this is Jen and thank you for joining me today. Today I have a Christmas card idea for you using Karen Burniston's Paper Frames pop-up. To start, I cut a piece of cardstock. It's from Fawn called Tomato, and I'm making a side fold A2 size card. I'm folding this in half and then I'm using my bone folder to get a good crisp fold. Now I'm going to add patterned paper, which comes from Echo Park, and it's called Celebrate Christmas. And I'm using double-sided adhesive tape that is 1/4 inch. I will add that all around my pattern paper inner pieces and then fold down just a little bit on each piece as I show here. And then I can add that to the card and move it around to get good placement. And then once I have it placed where I want, then I can push down and then remove the rest of the backing from the double-sided tape, the rest of the double-sided tape, sorry. And I will do the same thing for the other side as well. And just placing that onto the back of the card. And once I have good placement, I push down and a little piece got pushed back under, and then I just remove the rest of the backing off of the tape. So now it's time to put the pop-up mechanism into the card, and for this pop-up mechanism I'm going to add a little bit of green to it as well. So I'm just using my bone folder to fold on the fold lines for this pop-up mechanism. These are the tabs that will get glued into the card base. And then there is a center fold that needs to be folded in a mountain fold. And I'm just very carefully using my bone folder on this one. And I say careful because those little paper pieces are tiny compared to most of the pop-ups. And so just be very careful when you use the bone folder on that. What I did forget to do was to do the folds for the second pop-up mechanism, or second pop-up with this mechanism, and instead I did that after, but I should have done that first, and I'll show you that in just a second. So here I am going to glue these tabs down. I'm making sure that the center line of the pop-up mechanism is right against the fold line of my card, then adding my LINECO neutral pH adhesive in my fine tip bottle and pushing that down. So there's the first tab in. And then I will turn the card around and do the other side as well. This is a pretty easy one to glue into a card. It looks more complicated than it is, but it's a pretty easy pop-up. Now I'm just pulling out the pop-up little frames that are going to come out. The top frame and the center frame are the ones that are mountain folds, and then the middle frame is a valley fold. And this is where I forgot to fold those the ones that lift the actual pop-up up, and I'm doing that in the card. It's a little more difficult when it's already glued into the card, so I recommend doing it beforehand. And now I'm going to add the little bits of green to the middle piece of my pop-up mechanism. And I just thought it would be nice to have a little pop of color in that, so it wasn't so much red. So I did cut them in half so that it could still fold without it bunching up. And this way it would just fold along the red fold line, the red cardstock fold line, but the green cardstock is still there. So I'm just keeping that flat, and then I'm going to glue my pieces into my card. And I'm just making sure that I have that straight and that it doesn't go over, that the glue hasn't got stuck to the bottom. Now, one thing I did notice was that because the green cardstock I used was a little bit thicker, I found that the pop-up mechanism actually had a bit of a hard time lifting up. So if you were going to do this technique, I would advise using a lighter weight cardstock. It just seemed too heavy, and the pop-up mechanism it was like it just couldn't lift it. So I kept having to give it a little nudge as I'm doing right here. So you could use a pretty pattern paper or something like that if you wanted to do this type of technique where there's two different colors on the paper frames pop up. So I'm just making sure that I have that good and flat. And then I'm adding the next part. The nice part is it pops out enough that you can get your fingers in there, and then just make sure that, you know, it's in place. The paper frames pop-up is one that I don't use very often, but I really like it. It kind of reminds me of, and I don't know if you had these back in the day, but my grandmother used to have these fancy metallic streamers that would hang from the ceiling at Christmas time. And that's what these kind of remind me of. They were everywhere. So I'm using a craft cardstock from Fawn to I didn't want to make it too like white, green, and red. So I just added a little bit of craft cardstock for the backgrounds on my paper frames. And I die cut these using the dies that come with the paper frames pop-up. And they have that beautiful little decorative line around them with the little dots. I really like that. It just adds just a little bit of decoration to your pop-ups. Okay, so now that we have that done, I decided that I wanted to emboss two pieces to go along the edges of my card. And I did cut the paper a little too long. But I dug out my Cuttlebug, which I don't use very often, and I found this pretty snowflake embossing folder that I had. And I used that to make embossed pieces on either end of my pop-up card. So I do trim these down with my paper cutter, and then I'm just adding those to either side of my card. And see, it makes those pretty little snowflakes. And I'm just making sure that I have that placed correctly so it doesn't go over too much or it doesn't overlap anything. And then giving that a good push down. The glue doesn't take very long to set, but it gives you enough time that if you need to move the piece around a bit, you can. Okay, so we have that in the card now. And now I'm going to add some ribbon to the edge. I thought about using the mittens from the Christmas border, but it was just a little too much. And so I had this pretty green snowflake ribbon in my stash, and I thought, oh, you know what? I'll use that. So I'm just gluing that down. And this ribbon has a neat little, it's almost like a little rhinestone in the center of the snowflake, which is really pretty. It's just a very tiny little stone. And we'll do the same for the other side. This time I just measured it out and then cut it before I glued it in. And we'll just place that down. And I do give it a good push, making sure that it's right up to the line. Okay, so I'm going to make the little charms that I'm adding to the pop-up mechanism. And for that, I'm using Karen Burniston's Snow Charms. This is a new die set that came out with the most recent release. And in that, it has these little skates. It has a toboggan, a snow angel, some snowflakes, a pair of mittens. It's probably one of my favorite charm sets that she's come out with. So I've die cut the skates from silver mirrored cardstock and from white cardstock. And then there's a die that cuts the heels of the skates and the laces. And I've left those with white cardstock because I will color them in with Copic markers. So I'm just adding the white skate to the metal skate. And then that will cover up everything but the blade of the ice skate. And I'm just going to move these to the side so that I can carry on with the heels of my skates. So for that, I used Copic marker 100 black, and I just added the black to the base of the heel and of the skate. And then I'm going to go in with N6 and just blend that together. Now for the laces, I went with red, so I'm using R29. And I'm just going down the edge of the laces. And then I'm going in with R24 to blend those two together. You don't have to do this. You could just color or cut it from a colored cardstock. If you didn't want to do red, you could do any color. Or you could use Copic markers and make rainbow laces for the skates, which would be kind of neat. Now I'm just adding the heel to the bottom of the skates. And I like to just make sure I clean up any little extra glue blobs that I have. And just making sure I have that on straight. And then once we're done that, we can add the laces. So I just add a little glue to the back. And then add those laces to my skates. And now I'm going to add some shadow to my ice skates. So I'm going in with N1 and just adding a little bit of shadow to the back of the skate and to the foot of the skate and around the little tag that goes up, as well as near the laces. And I left the tag on because it always reminds me of like the tag you hold on to when you pull your boots on. And thankfully I have a pair of boots with those. Otherwise I don't think I'd get them on. So now I'm just placing the skates where I think I'd like them. And then I'm going to glue those down onto my paper frame. And there you can see I'm still having to give it a little bit of a push as I close the card. So now I'm moving on to the mittens, which is going to be the other little charm that I'm adding to the other side of the paper frame pop-up. And this little mitten set comes with the mittens and the cuffs and little hearts that you can use on the fronts of the mittens, which is really pretty. So for the mittens, I decided to go with greens. So I started with G29 to add some of the shadow to the mittens. And then I went in with G07 as my mid-range color. And then just blending those two together. And then last but not least, YG25. Do you have a favorite Copic color combination? And if you do, just post it in the comments below so I can see what you guys like to use for coloring. Or if you don't use Copics, what do you use? I'm always interested to know. So I'm just coloring the hearts with the R29 and R24. And then I'm going to just add a little dab of glue to each mitten and then add my hearts. Now for the cuffs, I went in with N1 just to add some ribbing. And now I'm just going to glue those on. And I just want to make sure that those are on good and straight. So now I'm going to go in with R29 and color in the string that holds them together. And then R24 to blend those reds together. And now we can add our mittens to the card. If you haven't already gotten the snow charms, I really recommend getting them. It's a great addition to her other charms, such as the winter charms and the there's the snow charms, the winter charms, and the, I think it's holiday charms. But there's all kinds of different ones, and they're great for making Christmas cards. So I decided I wanted to add a sentiment to one side of my card. And I'm using Karen Burniston's new sentiment stamp set. And that is called Season of Cheer. So this is a really great stamp set. It comes with all kinds of different little sentiments. And so I used VersaMark ink and white embossing powder on Fawn green cardstock called Algae. And then I'm just going to add that on and then use my heat set tool to set that in place. And once that's all done, I'd like to give it a wipe down to remove any of the excess static powder. And now we can add that to the side of the card. Now to the other side of the card, I want a place to be able to sign it. So using some of the pieces that came with the paper frames pop-up and the same green algae cardstock with white cardstock, I added a little label that you could sign the inside of the card with. And our inside of the card's all done. So now let's start on the front of the card. So I used another piece of the same pattern paper that's inside, and I'm adding another piece of embossed snowflake white paper that is 3 inches wide by 5 3/8 long. Now I'm going to add that across my card. In hindsight, I should have trimmed it a little smaller. So instead of like 3 inches, gone maybe 2.5. Now I'm going to color my toboggan or sled. I don't know what Americans call it. We call it a toboggan up here in Canada. I don't know if it's the same down in the States. I know there are certain things that are different down there that are different up here. So it's kind of neat to find those things out. So to color the toboggan, I'm going in with E37. And then I will use a lighter color to blend the two together, and I used E35, and I only used the two colors this time. Sometimes I use the brick beige, but I just decided to go with the two colors. And then to do in between the panels of the toboggan, I went in with E59. Now to color in the piece at the top, I used N6, N4, and N2 to color in to make that look like a piece of metal that's holding the toboggan together. Now for the larger panel, I'm using R29 and R24. And then just blending those two together. And I like to clean my workstation frequently because, especially with Copic markers, it gets on the glass top, and then when you go to color with another color, sometimes that color can blend into your work. So I try and keep my workstation relatively clean. It does get a lot of glue on it. So I'm just gluing the wooden panel down onto the base of the toboggan. And then I'm going to add some red and white striped baker's twine to add like a rope that you would use to pull the toboggan up the hill or back to the car or wherever you want to take it. So I'm just setting 2 little dots of glue to the back and then just pressing those end pieces into the glue. And then I'm going to add a little drop of glue to the front onto the wooden panel. And this was kind of giving me a bit of a hard time. It didn't want to stay down. It was like not having it today, but I got it. I also decided to use the tree that comes from Karen Burniston's Winter Charms, and I die cut that from the same green Algae cardstock, and I'm using a size 10 white jelly pen just to add some detail to it, which is great that you can use it with these, you can do that with these dies. Some of her dies come with that where you can add distress ink to it or a pen, and then it adds like a decorative pattern onto your die cut. So here I'm going to stamp a sentiment, and this is from the same sentiment stamp set called Seasons of Cheer. And I'm just going to use Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink for this one. And then this will go onto the front of our card. And instead of the green for the background, I used the tomato red cardstock. And then I'm just going to add that to the center of my card. So I'm just going to glue all my pieces down. Making sure that I have my centerpiece in there so I know approximately where to put everything. And you could add more decoration to the front. I try and keep the front simple, especially when it's a pop-up, because there's so much going on the inside. And now we have all that pressed down. I'm going to glue the front panel to the front of my card. And for this, I use glue instead of double-sided adhesive tape, because then if I need to reposition it, I can. And because it's bulky, I usually put the front down and I push down from the inside of the card. And there's our card all finished. So I highly recommend trying the paper frames to make a pretty Christmas card. Thank you for joining me today and have a great day.